From the leading broadcast source on the Moxley murder and the Skakel appeals, Murder in Greenwich, a murder that's captivated a nation for 45 years. With the recent vacating of Michael Skakel's murder conviction, we look back at the highlights of the 4 shows on the case we've done on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell and Business Talk with Jim Campbell. With Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who puts his reputation on the line for his cousin Michael Skakel, proclaiming he's innocent, charging he was framed, claiming he can ID the real killers. With Mickey Sherman, the lead defense attorney for Michael Skakel, whose alleged incompetent defense was cited by the Connecticut Supreme Court in their recent decision to overturn the conviction. With Len Levitt, longtime leading investigative journalist on the case. Bob Drake, the leading Moxley murder case researcher. And Vito Colucci, the private investigator on the defense team for Michael Skakel. That's all tonight, only on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We're joined now by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has written a book claiming that Michael Skakel was framed and innocent of the murder. Let me ask you first, because this is what folks have asked me, prominent family, leading environmentalist, why are you risking your reputation? Why are you doing this?
Well, I wrote the book because the same reason that I wrote the article, my Atlantic Monthly article in 2003, because I knew Michael Skakel was innocent. And I watched the whole trial happen, and it was like watching a slow motion train wreck. I knew from watching it that he was being railroaded.
The book is incredibly detailed. And so for my looking at this, I said, well, I'm going to go look at some of the stuff that you used and that's out there, the Sutton Report, which we just talked about what that is, the Furman book. I looked at Martha's diary a little bit, the YouTube that you recommended on Tony Bryant, the Atlantic Monthly article that you wrote, and then obviously framed. First off, on the Atlantic Monthly article, that was obviously focused on Kenneth Littleton, who was the tutor, extensively. In your book here, he has almost a bulletproof alibi with Tommy Skakel. The sexual encounter ended at 9:50 between Martha and Tommy. He then watched the French Connection, either at 10 or 10:17 he arrived. That means that Littleton had that little window to go out, pick up a golf club, and rage kill someone he didn't know because he had just moved in that night. What about the sort of the changes in even your approach?
Well, when I wrote the Atlantic Monthly article in 2003, I was very careful about saying, I don't know that Kenny Littleton committed this crime, but I know that the evidence against him was far stronger than any evidence against Michael Skakel. Michael Skakel could not have committed the crime. He was 11 miles away with 5 eyewitnesses when the crime was committed. There were 8 eyewitnesses that remained at home at Belhaven who either saw him left or saw him leave, saw him come back, and all of them have testified through the years that he was not at the house at that time. Kenny Littleton, on the other hand, had 5 separate alibis. Every time he talked to police, his alibis changed dramatically. He failed lie detector tests on multiple occasions. He was linked by police to 20 other serial killings, mainly of young blonde girls Martha's age in Canada and the United States and different places where he'd lived. And he was in and out of prisons and mental hospitals, and he made several statements that appeared to be confessions to the crime. So there was a very strong case against him. I don't believe that Kenny Littleton committed the crime. And I said at the time that I didn't know, because I don't think the evidence was sufficient. I think it pointed to him in many ways, and he was by far the strongest suspect. And he was the primary suspect of the police who were investigating this for 25 years.
To me, I looked at a framework too. Could you establish reasonable doubt legally? And I think that's not actually, honestly, very hard to do, going beyond Tommy Skakel. Why is it that you don't list him as a logical suspect?
Oh, well, I do in this book.
But he's not anywhere near your killer, in terms of priorities and how you list them out.
Each one of the suspects I devote a chapter to, and Tommy has the longest chapter. Tommy Skakel didn't commit this crime. His alibi is I would say it's ironclad. It's not. Michael's is the strongest alibi, but Jonathan Benedict, who's the prosecutor in this case, and Detective Frank Garr, who had a great antipathy, hates the Skakels, and spent a lot of his career trying to link the Skakels to this crime. But even he says that Tommy Skakel could not possibly have committed this crime. And the reason he gives is the same reason that you described for Kenny Littleton, that he's a 17-year-old kid. He would have had to murder Martha. The murder took place at 10 o'clock at night. And Tommy, 20 minutes later, was watching The French Connection.
He also has no motive.
He has no motive, exactly. But, whoever committed this crime was covered with blood. He was wearing the same clothes that he wore at dinner. And that fact is attested to by Kenny Littleton, who was the principal suspect, and it would have a great incentive to inculpate Tommy.
I agree.
On the other hand, Tommy really doesn't alibi Kenny Littleton, because Tommy says that when they were watching The French Connection, Kenny Littleton kept himself draped in a blanket the whole time, and that blanket could have been used. And it was odd because it was hot. It was warm inside the room.
It's just hard to conceive that.
It's hard to conceive.
He moves in, he doesn't even know her. But
yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you on the Sutton report. They identify a profile of the killer. That profile fits Michael the best, 14 to 18, walking distance of the victim, same socioeconomic, strong sibling rivalries, behavioral problems in school, sexually immature, which you say in the book, by the way, under the influence of alcohol. And they describe Michael as severely agitated, possibly of psychotic proportions. He had a very abusive background. I happen to, Tommy Reynolds is great friends with my parents. Ann Reynolds Skakel was the mother. When she died, the family basically fell apart. I feel bad for Michael in that sense. But the Sutton report, basically, profile and fit, he's the best fit from there.
There's a number of problems with that theory. One is that Michael couldn't have committed the crime because he was 11 miles away with all the eyewitnesses. The prosecutor, nobody's ever been able to explain how he could have committed this crime from 11 miles away.
If he went to the backcountry.
Then why did nobody see him the entire night?
Well, hypothetically, Bob,
you would have had you need 15 people essentially to be lying to say that he didn't go to the backcountry, including people who have no relationship to the Skakel family. The other thing is that Tommy Sheridan, who was an insider in the Skakel family, who dreamed up the Sutton report, then subtly manipulated the contents of the Sutton report to implicate Michael. So it was the whole exercise of the Sutton report was deliberately orchestrated in order to falsely implicate Michael. I wrote in 2003, when Michael was convicted, it shocked the Skakel family, and it shocked me personally. Nobody believed that he would ever be convicted of this. And I wrote an article for the Atlantic Monthly that detailed how Michael could not have committed the crime. The article won a number of prizes. But in addition to that, I received a note shortly after its publication from a man I'd never heard of called Crawford Mills, who was a classmate of Michael Skakel's at Brunswick School in Greenwich. Crawford Mills opened with a provocative line. He said the jury got it wrong, and then he outlined this extraordinary story that he knew who actually killed Martha Moxley, and that person who had informed him of this was another classmate, Tony Bryant. Tony Bryant is a member of a very prominent African-American family in New York. His cousin is Kobe Bryant, the Lakers star. His brother played in the NBA also for the Mavericks. His mother is an Oscar-winning film producer. He was part of an integration push at Brunswick School in 1973 and 1974, along with one other African-American student. He was a star athlete. He was not a friend of Michael Skakel's. In 1975, he moved back to New York to be with his mother, and he enrolled in public school in New York called the Charles Evan Hughes High School. While in that fall, he befriended two boys who committed the crime. He knew the boys as Adolf and Burr. They were large kids. They were a year older than their classmates. They were 6'3", 6'3" and 6'4", respectively. Each of them weighed around 250 pounds, and they were both very powerful athletes who were capable of committing a crime that required the kind of savagery that Martha Moxley's murder entailed. Tony brought them up to Greenwich on about 6 occasions to hang out with his old pals in Greenwich. On one of those occasions, the two boys met Martha Moxley, and this is recorded in her diary that she was at Tony brought them to a Sacred Heart mixer in Greenwich to a dance, and Martha describes that evening also in her diary. And Adolf Hasbrook, one of the two boys, became obsessed with Martha at that dance, and for the next 2 months could talk about nothing else except for his fixation for Martha. On Halloween Eve, they came back to Greenwich to participate in Hell Night or Mischief Night, which was a big celebration in Greenwich where kids wanted the town committing acts of vandalism. They went up. They arrived. They planned a sexual assault on the train on the way up, the two boys. They told Tony that they were going to get a Greenwich girl caveman style, which meant, according to Tony, hit her over the head with a club, drag her into the bushes by her hair, and then sexually assault her. When they got to Greenwich, they wandered around, throwing eggs, throwing rocks at cars, soaping people's windows, hiding behind bushes, hiding behind stone walls to avoid detection. It was a cold night. They eventually ended up at 8:45 that evening on the Skakel's back lawn on the chipping tee that Rush Skakel maintained, Michael's father maintained for his house guests and for his family. They picked up 3 golf clubs on the chipping tee, 3 Skakel golf clubs that were strewn there from a Mitsubishi chipping tournament that Rush Skakel had hosted a few weeks before. The two boys told Tony, now we have our caveman clubs. Tony got nervous and threw his club away and went home 20 minutes before the murder was committed. The two boys then watched Tommy Skakel making out with Martha on the back of the tool shed, which was visible to them, but they were not visible because of the ambient light from the house. Tommy and Martha could be seen, but the boys could not be seen from an area that is known as the Mead. They assaulted Martha Moxley on her way home and then hid out that night in the home of an 11-year-old boy called Jeffrey Byrne, who was a mutual friend of Crawford Mills and Tony Bryan and Michael Skakel, and who was a neighbor of Michael Skakel's. The following Monday, that was a Thursday night, the following Monday, Tony met them for the first time again at school, and they confessed to him that they had gotten their caveman, that they had, in other words, committed the murder. And over the next 2 months, they added many details that made it very clear that they had killed Martha Moxley. In addition to that, Jeffrey Byrne, the 11-year-old boy, made many trips down to New York City from Greenwich by himself on the train because he was so traumatized by what had happened that night. And he was angry at Tony for getting him involved with these boys, and he warned Tony, they're bad. You need to stay away from them. Tony confessed, told his mother what had happened. His mother recognized the racial landscapes at this time. It was 1975, and that the Greenwich police were notoriously racist. That Tony had placed himself a few feet from the murder scene with a golf club in his hands 20 minutes before the murder, that he was black, and she warned him that he could be implicated in this crime if he confessed, and that he had brought the murderers to Greenwich. She said he had to keep his mouth shut and that he had to separate himself from his 2 friends. He did that. She sent him away to Texas to boarding school to get him out of New York City, away from these kids, and he didn't talk about it for almost 3 decades. When I finally reached him on the phone, I said to him, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Michael Skakel's my cousin. I'd like to ask you about Martha Moxley's murder. And there was dead silence on the end of the line, and then he said, after about 5 seconds, he said, I've been waiting 27 years for this phone call. I was able to track down a yearbook from the Charles Evan Hughes High School and determined that Adolf was Adolf Hasbrook of Bridgeport, Connecticut, that Burr was Burton Tinsley of Portland, Oregon. I called both of them and had conversations and tape recorded those conversations. And they admitted that all of the important particulars. Of course, they didn't admit to killing Martha Moxley, but they admitted knowing Tony Bryant, knowing Crawford Mills, hanging out in Greenwich with Tony Bryant. They admitted knowing Jeffrey Byrne and the house that they spent the night and cleaned off the blood. Afterwards, they described the interior of that house with details that nobody else could have known, right down to the brand of the refrigerator in Jeffrey Byrne's kitchen. They then, after some time, after several conversations, they began dissembling, and then later denied that they had been at Greenwich that night. They both said they had looked at their diaries from 28 years before and that they had been mistaken and were not in Greenwich that night after all. And then when we subpoenaed them, they took the Fifth Amendment. But I found in my investigation mountains of corroborative evidence to support Tony's stories, including the fact that there were 2 hairs that were taken off of Martha's body or from the blanket on which she was placed, and one of those hairs was identified by the FBI crime lab as being negroid, and nobody has ever been able to explain that. The other hair was described as being having Asian characteristics, and Tony Bryant describes Burton Tinsley as Caucasian, but with American Indian blood or Asian blood, so that would be consistent with that description.
Let me ask you, you mentioned estrangement between you and Michael. Michael's done a lot of good works for the last X number of years. Even the judge had said that when he sentenced him. Why has Michael and Tommy not spoken in 20 years? Is Tommy bitter that he was the suspect out?
Tommy actually would like to reconcile with Michael. But Michael, I believe will reconcile with Tommy at some point. Michael, first of all, has been in jail for 11 years. And he had a very little contact with the outside world. He only saw his son 8 times. I think that reconciliation has not taken place. Michael has a really strong AA program. He's been sober for 35 years, and one of the things that that program teaches is you have to reconcile your relationships, and I think he's going to do that.
So he knows that should be on his agenda. Why do you think that this was a circumstantial evidence case, meaning there was no direct evidence, DNA, witness, anything? How do you think a jury came to that unanimous decision?
They came to the decision because of the perjured testimony of two supposedly confession witnesses. The state, as you said, had no evidence against them, so the only way that it could make a case was through a confession. Michael, of course, had never confessed, so they had to concoct them. And what I show in the book for the first time is how Frank Garr, the corrupt Greenwich police detective, suborned the perjury of these witnesses in order to get them to falsify evidence against them. And I now have transcripts of Garr's secret transcripts of his initial discussions with those witnesses, which actually shows him point by point suborning John Higgins' perjury. The state lucked out because Coleman died, who was a 350-pound junkie, and was not a good witness. He changed the story repeatedly. He would collapse on cross-examination, but he died right before trial, and the state was allowed to use an actor, a very buttoned-down, presentable actor, to stand in for him and recite his testimony, and the jury afterwards said they believed him. There were so many holes that the prosecution did something very odd in this case. It never tried to show how Michael could possibly have committed this crime from 11 miles away. It threw to the jury. It said, we don't know how he did it, but he confessed, therefore he must have done it. And then the prosecutor, John Benedict, went across ethical boundaries to show an audiovisual that was absolutely decisive at the end of this trial.
It appeared to be Michael confessing, right?
That appeared that was cut and paste confession to murder, which Michael never made.
Thanks to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. answering any question we threw at him and joining us here on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell.
Money. 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 You gotta have it. When you need it, what do? If you don't have a rich uncle, call LendingTree. With us, hundreds of banks compete for your business, so you'll get loans with competitive interest rates, and in some cases, with no closing costs. So here's the deal. If you need money, call us. Do you want to refinance your current loan? Are you 62 or older and interested in a reverse mortgage? Then call LendingTree now. 888-794-1645, 888-794-1645. We've closed over $250 billion in loans. We know what we're doing and can help you. Call right now for a free quote. 888-794-1645, 888-794-1645, 888-794-1645. That's 888-794-1645. NMLS number 1136.
And now we're joined by Mickey Sherman, a longtime Greenwich fixture, a leading lawyer, and the lead defense attorney for Michael Skakel in the first murder trial. His alleged incompetent defense was used on the appeals cases. The appeals court overturned Michael Skakel's conviction. He was released from prison. The next level of appellate appeals reversed that, put back the conviction, and finally the Connecticut Supreme Court just again overturned the murder conviction of Michael Skakel. Do you have, at this stage, a whodunit kind of thing? You continue to maintain, I assume, that Michael was innocent.
Always have, and I always will believe that's the case. Whodunit? I think there's a good chance that his brother may have done it. Do I know that for sure? Absolutely not. Could I prove it? No. And I was criticized widely in the habeas action for not proving that Tom Skakel did it. But I'm not the police. If I had concrete evidence or even tenable evidence, I would have acted on it as best I could.
In fact, I'll ask. We'll talk about that a little bit because one of the I think the big three habeas issues was that you chose not to use Tommy as a third party culpability. The question is first off, it was circumstantial, right? And the evidence against Tommy was in the Sutton report, which is hearsay and privilege, right? Right. So is there any evidence that you really could have put on showing that Tommy did it without violating that?
No, and especially when he told me, when Tommy and his lawyer told me that he would invoke the Fifth Amendment. So he wouldn't even open his mouth on the stand. And the question is, how would the jury react to that? Would they see that Michael is there fronting for his brother? Would they come to the conclusion that Tommy's involved, but he's helping Michael? God only knows. There's just too many.
And it proves the motive of jealousy and rage, potentially.
Yeah,
right?
I always thought that was such bull. When Judge Kavanowski marshaled the evidence, I mean, I know Judge Kavanowski forever. He's a terrific guy, a wonderful judge. But I was so not outraged. I was so upset that he took the time to what they call marshal the evidence, which is basically give his scoop as to what could have happened. And they went into this whole jealousy thing, which, I mean, 15-year-olds don't kill each other out of jealousy. It just doesn't happen. At least not in Bellhaven, not in Greenwich, not in Chickahominy. It just doesn't happen.
So you use the tutor as a third-party culpability option, let's call it that. Did you think at the time Tommy was the most likely, and then still use Littleton, or you just
didn't know?
You didn't know that. Okay.
Didn't know.
Now, to me, and this, I know that legally it's probably not kosher, but if the Skakels are paying you, they wouldn't really, to me, view it as a win if you got Michael off and got his brother ending up getting convicted.
I wouldn't have cared.
You wouldn't have cared. So that wouldn't have played into it.
Absolutely not. And they gave me a free rein. Some people have said to me, well, did they tell you you can't do this, you can't do that? No, they always said. So it's your decision to use it. Totally. It just wasn't effective. With the tutor, Littleton, you had him confessing to the crime on tape. To his wife. Yeah. You had the police, the state's attorney's office. You had Frank Garr going to Boston to have the guy's wife tape him saying that he committed the crime. There was not ample evidence, but there was substantial evidence. And that's why I wanted to use him, as opposed to saying, well, it could have been him, and it might have been him, and it might have been him. They criticized me for just staying with one. I was going to ask you the buffet strategy next.
Exactly. But on the Garr, and I guess Jack Solomon always thought, the investigator, that it was Littleton, but then it kind of came out that was sort of coerced, that confession, right? Because he was set up.
But he still said some of the things that they couldn't coerce him with. In other words, in his phoned up confessions, there was bits of information that were not planted there by Garr or by Jack Solomon.
But it was phoned up, kind of. So Some wasn't. Now, you weren't aware of that, right, at the time?
No, no.
Yeah, so you were kind of set up yourself on that. Let me ask you this on this judicial overreach. I would have thought that applied to attorneys that didn't do anything, maybe fell asleep, maybe were drunk. Am I wrong on that?
That's one of the main cases in attorney incompetence. Is there was a guy who I think he was charged with murder, and he appealed the case because he lost and claimed that his lawyer slept during the trial at counsel table.
Yeah, that I can relate to.
But here's the problem. The court in that state overruled the defense saying, well, your conviction stands because we've examined the record, and the lawyer didn't fall asleep at any of the important parts of the trial. So that's...
He got off on that?
Yeah, that's ineffectiveness of counsel.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me, this whole thing. Am I right in this? You could have said after the end of the prosecution case, this is circumstantial. You haven't proved that he was tortured in the land, those confessions. The people that we impeached, the guys, they were drug addicts of these guys. I'm not putting on a defense. And wouldn't that have been a legitimate defense?
No defense.
In other words, you said just what I said. You haven't proved the case. There's no evidence. That
would be the final argument. But you're absolutely right. And someone asked me a couple of days ago, maybe you heard it. I forgot where I said it, but I've said it before. The winning strategy, they asked me what I would do different in this case, what I would do different. And the only thing that I would do different, I would consider exactly what you just said, and that is not putting on a case. Because by the end of the state's case...
I came up with that myself. I'm not a lawyer.
There you go. By the end of the state's case, I was sure we won, as was everyone else in that courtroom.
Yeah.
So I think we lost this case on the testimony of the family. Now, I'm not trying to diss the family, but it just came out crappy. So if I had
it makes the judicial overreach, the Bishop ruling, look even more ridiculous, because I think you could have justified a no defense strategy, a resting strategy.
Yeah, but who's got the courage, defense lawyer-wise, to do that?
Oh, I agree. I'm just saying that...
If I had the... I can't say the word.
I'm really saying that Bishop was off limits with what he did.
Well, the last thing I want to do is saying something negative about Judge Bishop. I wake up screaming in the morning, in the evening, as I sat next to his bench for 4 days.
Let's go to what you call the buffet table.
Yeah.
Might you, in retrospect, have tried to throw some stuff on the wall, whether it be Tommy, Hasbrook, the caveman theory?
No. And the theories that they had, when you're talking about the two black guys did it.
Yes, Al Hasbrook, yeah.
That's essentially what it is. I mean, it's like when somebody buys...
By the way, it's a lynching.
Yeah, no, well, but it's just so bogus, apparently. Then there was a doctor in California, someplace in California, near L.A., who claimed that he knew something about the case and blah, blah, blah. I flew out there, I met with him. He was in John Moxley's high school class, and he claimed to have knowledge that that John was a serial killer. So John killed his sister.
That was in Bobby's book, by the way.
I know that. That's what I'm leading up to. Bobby asked me for all the information about that. I said, are you crazy? I mean, they actually put that in as a possibility. Yeah, meanwhile, the information the guy had, I tracked it down. All the people who were killed, they figured out the people who killed them. Wasn't it? And John Moxley.
Bobby thinks it has maintained Ken Littleton as a serial killer.
Well,
which is also nuts.
Also, after the trial, Bobby wrote a 37-page article in Atlantic Magazine saying that I screwed up because I didn't prove Ken Littleton did it. Right. Then he switched around to make it I screwed up because I didn't prove Halsberg or Tommy. The other theories, which there were so many of them, there was the out-of-control Xerox executives who were combing the...
I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, they were going about their business looking for Mr. Moxley, who was the head of Deloitte Touche, to kill him because they were some business deal they were being unfair about.
So they went after his wife instead. I mean, his daughter.
Yeah. But I mean,
how did you know? Back on the cavemen, the two black guys, Al Hasbrook, that that's now his theory. How did you know that Gaetano Bryant, who's the guy that brought this up and said he saw 12 people in Bellhaven and they went cavemen? How do you know that's so bogus?
It just from personal experience. Plus, it was brought forth by Vito Colucci, who was my investigator, and I just didn't trust that.
He was your investigator?
Yeah.
And you didn't trust him?
No.
Interesting. I'd forgotten that it came out of Vito. And so do you think Bobby actually believes that this guy did it, Hasbrook?
It depends on which way the wind is blowing.
Let's talk about Bobby for a second. In his book, the chapter on you, he calls you the clown, a media whore, that you had an incentive to not spend the money because you needed the money, that the family paid you up front. You didn't have a jury expert. You didn't look into the caveman thing. What's your response to all that?
I would do everything I did before. I think it's all bogus. As far as paying me, I charge them by the hours. Only 2 cases I've ever had in my life here, out of 40-some-odd years, I charged by the hour. I think it was $350, which by Greenwich standards is pretty darn low. Yeah. And at some point, they just didn't want to pay any more money. So they said, we'll give you a lump sum, and that became a situation where I only had X amount of dollars to work with, and they felt that was unethical. Well, if it wasn't, I didn't create that situation. They did.
But did it cause you not to hire a jury?
No. And I could have hired jury consultants. I know so many of them from TV and from working. I'm not crazy about them. It's as simple as that. I think it's voodoo. I've used them, and it just wasn't the case for it.
Let me ask you this then. You obviously think Bobby is full of bogus theories, but you believe Michael's innocent.
Yes.
How is that reconciled? Why hasn't Bobby figured out?
Well, I got the case in 1998. The case went to trial and was finished in 2002. Mm-hmm. And I would see Bobby no times. He came once for an hour and a half in those 4 years. He's so concerned about his cousin that he showed up once for an hour and a half. And
he had no strategy suggestions for you?
He had nothing, except criticism for me later on. Okay,
so what makes you 100% certain that Michael's innocent? Because why does Bobby have to create all this crap to try and make it?
Well, Bobby, I think, feels that if he can create enough dust, it'll whip something up. But that's just not the way it works. I don't think I know that Michael's innocent because I know the case. I know the date, the time that the murder was committed, because we proved that using Dr. Jahemchek, who came up from Houston. The dogs barking, which we brought in evidence, including even Dorothy Moxley agreed on the time of the death based on the dogs and stuff.
Close to when Tommy finished in the bushes.
9:30 between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. And then we had we knew that Michael was at the Terrian house, but that alibi should have just carried us all the way home.
The fact that he was in the backcountry.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most unfair thing that happened to Michael, either in or out of the courtroom through this whole period?
I think when the media, for example, there was a guy named Greg Coleman who testified. That's the guy that I got to admit that he used heroin.
Well, he was testifying for the grand jury, right?
And he was making and he was making stuff up. Nonetheless, he testified that he was there to guard Michael. He walked into a room. Michael was there, and something like 2 hours went by. Nothing was said. Nothing at all was said, according to this witness. And then finally the witness said, Michael looked at him and said, I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy. And like a total non sequitur. And what's unfair, not that happened, but that it was reported on the front page of the New York Post, just like that. And I think that's a tough headline to erase.
Will this case ever be put to bed?
Not in our lifetime.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's which is kind of a sad thing for the Moxley family, at least.
Yeah.
And maybe even for Michael. But,
totally for Michael.
That's Mickey Sherman, lead attorney on the initial Michael Skakel case for the defense. Bob Drake joins us now. He's the leading Moxley murder case researcher. He's been a source of tremendous amount of detailed information, considered now to have the most in-depth knowledge of the Moxley murder case of anyone. And we're back talking with experts on the Moxley murder, Len Levitt and Bob Drake. I want to get now to the other big point that Bobby Kennedy makes over and over again, which is that Michael was 11 miles away, so therefore he could not and did not do the murder. Let's get cut 19 from the Today Show and Matt Lauer.
The most powerful piece of evidence is that he could not have done it because he was 11 miles away with 5 eyewitnesses, plus there was another 8 witnesses at the house.
All right, Bob, that's somewhere between 5 and 13 people who can give him an alibi.
The 5 people he's talking about are Jimmy, Rush, Johnny, and also Dennis Osorio and his cousin Georgianne. Georgianne, under oath, has both at the grand jury and during the trial, claimed she didn't see them, so that she's not an eyewitness. So take it down to 4. The question about the 8 witnesses who saw him leave and claimed they saw him leave and knew when he got back, there were 2 potential witnesses who saw him leave, which were Tommy and Martha, no one else. And as far as seeing him come back, no one saw him come back. So that's 0 for 8 on his return. The most important witness, who never gets talked about in this book, was Julie Skakel, because Julie Skakel, after the Lincoln had left, came out of the house, got in the car, and realized she didn't have her keys with her. And she sent Andrea back in. And right then, at a time when Tommy and Martha were positioned at the side door, a figure ran by her and she yelled at the figure, "Michael, come back here," because she, quote, thought it was Michael, unquote. That was very important to the jurors who asked for a readback on Julie's testimony. You won't find it in Bobby's book. You won't find it in his 2003 article. Julie was in tears when Mickey was trying to convince her to say that Lincoln was still in the driveway when this happened in order to shift the time around. But this is a bona fide thing for juries to think about, because no one has come forward, a look-alike figure, to claim that they were the person who was running by.
Well, not only that, doesn't Andrea or Julie's later testimony say at 9:50 there was this big figure that looks closer to Al Hasbrook?
This is actually the most significant thing. Len, when he did his first article, he had only the unredacted police reports to go on. So he was unaware that Julie had this sighting, I think at the time in 1991 when you first wrote the article. But this is the one contribution that Tom Keegan really made to the case, was he redacted this interview. And Julie, when she was interviewed by the Sutton Associates in 1991, she wasn't aware that she had said this. So she told a whole story. She had transmogrified, either by hypnosis or by lack of memory, this memory into something that happened when she got home.
Right. To me, though, a key common sense factor is that he's in the Lincoln and he's seeing Tommy do what he's doing with Martha. He's got hormones. He has the hots for her. It makes no sense to me that he gets in a car and goes to the backcountry and leaves his brother with her. And the second part that is tough to understand is what's in that 2 hours. What's going on with Martha? How does he suddenly get back her to kill her? It seems the jealousy, rage fits right along that timeline.
I agree. It does. It does all fit. But you want to jump in, Bob?
Go ahead.
Well, my interest in Julie's second sighting story is that it's part of this conspiracy to frame Hasbrook and Tinsley for the crime. And it was previously part of this conspiracy to frame Ken for the crime. If you read what Julie was asked on November 15th, 1975, 2 weeks after the murder, this is about returning from having taken Andrea home. Mm-hmm. They say, and Lenny is talking to Julie, he says, "Then you turned into your driveway, locked your car, right? When you got out, was there any movement outside your house? No. You didn't see anybody. Did you hear anything? Not that I can remember. Any dogs barking? No, it was pretty quiet because I came inside and I went, back on the porch and I didn't even see any of my brothers." That's what she says in 1975.
And of course, Bobby changes that completely in this book.
Oh, he's changed it so much. To the Sutton Associates, he says, "As I approached the front door, I heard a noise in the bushes and saw a big, dark person crouched, moving underneath the kitchen windows."
Julie?
That's Julie. Yeah, in the Sutton reports. At trial, she says, "As I was walking to the front door, someone came and ran in front of me going north. I'm not sure what the directions are," etc. She tries not to remember that she ever saw Michael, and she says, "Oh, I don't think it was Michael." Prior to that. But look at what he changes this to. He says, as she turned her headlights off, she saw a dark figure running the length of the house from left to right in a crouched position. This is from the book, carrying an object in his hand. She recalls that he was large and possibly hooded. He dashed across the driveway and disappeared between the trees behind the tool shed. This would put him within a few feet of Martha and Tommy just as Martha was leaving for home. Julie says she was so shaken by the sight of this man running that she stayed in her car for a few minutes and missed the end of Ellery Queen.
So it looks like it's all made up. Thanks to Bob Drake, a source of detailed information for this show, leading Moxley murder case researcher. We're joined now by Vito Colucci, Jr. He's a longtime and well-known private investigator. He started his career in the Stanford Police Department, where he had the guts and took the risks to expose widespread corruption linked to mob families, and he was the lead investigator on the Michael Skakel murder case. And I know you can't get into detail this, but I wanted to get what your thoughts were. The Connecticut Supreme Court reversed the prior appellate court's decision, and Michael Skakel's conviction for murder was vacated. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. It's a long time coming with this. I mean, I think nobody knows Michael Skakel or has spent maybe more time with him, other than probably his lawyers, of course, than me.
All right,
Sitting face to face in my office, asking him the hard questions and all kinds of things of that nature. And I felt from the beginning that he was not the man. Not the man for this case, that's for sure. But you got to realize at that time somebody had to pay the price. And I'm not saying there was any corruption done. No, of course not. But, he was the one arrested. There could have been two other people. Like I tell people that if they were arrested, they would have been convicted also. So.
And you're talking about Tom Skakel?
Right, and the caretaker, the tutor.
The tutor.
The tutor who is very famous now for that was the worst first day.
Yeah, in the history of
working. He owns that was the worst first day in the history of working. As soon as he gets there, he's looked at, he's followed around by the PD and everything else. So I mean, it's he got that.
So can I interpret you're saying one of those three guys you think did it, and you don't think Michael's one of them, but
I think any one of the three there would have been enough evidence on. I mean, Tommy was born. He fell as an infant,
yes.
Had the brain injury,
yes.
All that kind of stuff, fits of rage, okay, and things of that nature. He's the last one with her,
yes.
Okay? I'm not saying anything out of school. He's the last one on the ground, sending each other into doing masturbation on each other. He probably, maybe, if it was him, if they arrested him, the DA would say, well, ladies and gentlemen, they're doing this, they're touching each other. Tommy wants more. She don't want to give him more. Yeah. Those rage and all that stuff comes back in his head. I mean, he would have been gone too. I mean, the tutor, same thing. They would have found a lot in him. He started, after this happened, he started a life of crime, be it petty little crimes. Okay, flipped out in his mind.
Yes, he did.
And the wife cornered him in I don't know if it was a hotel room or in their house, bugged. Yeah. She wore a wire, and she's asking him different questions. And he says, do you mean that's when I said I killed her? He was like very confused, but he was a mess. So they would have got him too. I don't have a doubt in my mind. So any of those three would have been gone.
So can I deduce you don't think there was any cavemen and things like that hanging around?
I don't know. I went down to Florida. I'm one that interviewed Tony Bryant. Okay,
yes.
Stuff he said was all found. He named the brand of beer that's no longer around that was in the backyards of one of the rich people there that had a refrigerator outside.
Yeah.
They would drink this kind of beer, the three of them, and throw the cans on the ground and the whole bit. So there was many things, the parties, the things going on in Greenwich, the the festivals and all things like that. And many people remember Tony and the boys being there. There's no such thing where nobody knew they were there. I've interviewed the people and got statements from them all.
Vito, I don't think the case will be retried. What do you think?
No, definitely not. It can't be.
It can't be.
Everybody's dead, first of all.
Yeah.
My information, all the stuff that I brought to the table, 6 or 8 things, never was checked on by the first attorney. Okay, I brought this. I said, hey, you got to call these guys, Rochester Police. They'll break the case. None of that was ever done. When they interviewed me with the second bunch of attorneys, Santos and Sealy, when I was on the stand, they had my work product. So they were able to ask me this. What did you find here? Yeah. Did you give that to the attorney? Yes. Did he use it? No. And the first time around when we got Michael out, 4 years ago, the judge said if they would have used a lot of the stuff that Mr. Colucci brought, we wouldn't be standing here today.
So you think you definitely think that Mickey screwed up the case? Mickey Sherman.
He didn't do the best of jobs. Let's just say that. I mean, it was a lot of things were strange on it.
Vito, what do you think then about, he's up at that land place supposedly confessing all the time, his life was out of control, etc. You don't think there was consciousness of guilt, or that you don't believe his confessions, etc.?
No, he didn't do that confession. I talked to the mother of the subject, and she saw him talking to Frank R., the Greenwich detective that came to his house to interview him. And the mother and the brother were in the other room listening. And he's saying, yeah, Michael said that to me, and he did this to me, and that. I called the mother afterwards, okay? And I said, what was the story with that? Oh, you ever find out why? Oh, I said to him, why did you say those things? Those things aren't true. Be quiet. I'm going to get a big reward. And that was her own words, the mother and the brother, out of their mouths. So I had all that, too, and everything. So it is what it is.
it's
there
done.
won't be any more trial. People may still. Could they go back and do it? Yeah, it'll cost them tens of thousands of dollars with nobody to bring to the witness stand
and
anymore.
Mrs. Moxley doesn't want to go.
Oh, she's a great lady.
Yeah,
I've talked to her. She's a great lady.
Great woman. Yeah. Len Levitt, the longtime leading investigative journalist on the Moxley murder case and instrumental on getting the case reopened after 30 years.
Let me just jump in
Go ahead.
with one point here, is that this is predicated on the fact that the murder took place at 9:50, shortly before 10 o'clock. And it's not clear at all that that's really what happened. I mean, this is a flaw in the case. The Greenwich police really accepted that line of thinking because two dogs were barking uncontrollably. And the Sutton guys accepted that too. And I remember Frank Garr saying to this Billy Krebs, one of the Sutton investigators, gee, I'd sure like to interview those dogs. It is not at all clear that that's what happened. The second scenario is that this happened after Michael returned from the Terrians. And it happened when remember Michael's first story was he came back from the Terrians, he went right to bed. His second story was that he went out at midnight. And then he climbed the tree. He claimed he climbed the tree outside Martha's window, masturbated in the tree, ran by the crime scene. That's the second scenario about when this murder occurred. You know, the case was flawed from the beginning. But to me, you know, sitting through that trial, that was the question I was saying to myself. If I were the jurors, I would really be skeptical about exactly what happened because nobody knows what happened. If, in fact, Martha was killed at midnight, where was she between the hours of 10 o'clock and 12? Nobody knows that. Tommy's story has always made me uncomfortable. I don't know if Tommy's telling the truth. Remember, he lied to the police also. That was the latest version that he told the Sutton guys was, Martha and I, the mutual masturbation to orgasm. I'm not sure that that's true, and I'm not sure that that happened when that happened. This is a real problem I would have had if I were on the jury.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, where I want to end this is, I ended it with Bobby, and I said, you know, how do we get Mrs. Moxley closure and that aspect of it? And Len is very close to Mrs. Moxley, so I'd like to end it with that.
Well, I think that Bobby Kennedy said about her was absolutely reprehensible when he said in effect that she was responsible for the suicide of the guy who brought the Hasbrook and Tinsley part of this thing into to him. The fact that he could actually write down that John Moxley, Martha's brother, should have been a suspect. On what possible basis, can he, would he make an allegation like that? Because there's nothing to support anything like that.
Okay, we're going to end it right there. I want to thank Len and Bob for all their time, and it's a great piece of work. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Attention small business owners. Growing your business can be tough. Just when you thought you were making money, you found out that you owe the government money. And now that you owe the IRS their cut of your business profits, you may be broke. And if you don't take things seriously, you could go to jail or have your business shut down. But you do have an option. If the IRS is threatening you for unpaid taxes, call the Tax Resources Network. Their tax professionals and ex-IRS agents have over 23 years of experience dealing with the IRS, saving business owners and the self-employed millions in tax dollars. Let us negotiate with the IRS on your behalf. We may be able to reduce your tax debt for a lot less than you owe, help with the IRS audit, and even criminal investigations. If your business owes the IRS $15,000 or more and the IRS is threatening you, don't wait and let your business get shut down or worse. Call for a free consultation. Call 800-910-4980. 800-910-4980. That's 800-910-4980. Again, 800-910-4980.